Hi, welcome. I want to introduce you to a tool that has changed my life. 5 years ago, I was living paycheck to paycheck, and quite honestly, I was living that way for most of my adult life. The financial advice that is out there was just not working for me, and I tried many different ways over the years to budget and get in control and out of my debt. Unfortunately, nothing ever stuck or really worked long term. So after doing some research, I came across budgeting by paycheck, which was a new idea to me because everything I had seen up to that point was always monthly budgeting. And it was really hard for me to budget for an entire month when I could barely budget for a single paycheck. So this idea definitely opened some new windows of opportunity, and I had created my own budgeting method based upon this. Initially started out on paper, which allowed me to learn how to budget and understand how to pay down debt over time. Within 3 years, I was able to pay off over $47,000 in credit card and student loan debt. And I was also able to build an emergency savings account that I previously didn't have before. So it allowed a lot of financial stability and security that I had little to no experience with personally. I'm excited to share the digital version of my budgeting tool, which has been streamlined, optimized, and allows flexibility to budget in whichever way works best for you. So if you're ready to take control of your finances, allow me to show you how to use the tool step by step. Once you purchase the product, you're going to receive a file that contains a link to download the planner. Once you click on the link, you're going to be prompted to create a copy of the planner for yourself. The planner was designed using Google Sheets, so you will need to have an active Google account in order to use the file. Once you click on the link from the file, you're going to see a similar message from Google Sheets that states that you're about to copy a document. This is just asking if you want to make a copy of the Paycheck Budget Planner to your Google account, and you're going to click yes to make a copy. Just a note, this Sheets file does contain an app script which contains a lot of the coding in order to do the automation within the planner. So you will need to also ensure that you allow the scripts file. When you do copy the file to your Google account, it is going to be your own distinct private file. So you don't need to worry about any concerns of it being shared with anybody else. Upon default, it is private to your account unless you choose to share it later. The file opens up into the instruction sheet, and the instructions contains lots of detailed information explaining exactly how to use the planner, and it goes through each of the tabs that you see down here below. So there's a lot of detail in this instruction sheet, which is intended to help you understand how to use the file and the related sheets and what type of information that you need to enter. But this tutorial will also go through those details as well. The intended usage for this planner is also for checking and spending accounts. So likely when you receive your paycheck income, your income is being deposited into a checking account. And then additionally, as you pay for your expenses and your spending, those expenses are also being taken from your checking account. So that is what this file was built to use. It is not optimized for investment accounts or for savings accounts. A few things that I want to highlight on the instruction sheet is going to be the important information and getting started. And then from there, we'll jump into the sheets. For the important information, there is a notice here about compatibility. This file is specifically used and intended for Google Sheets only. it is not compatible with Microsoft Excel due to the customized scripts and formulas that are used within this file. There's no guarantee that if you choose to use this in Excel that it's going to work. So to ensure that it works properly, please use Google Sheets at all times. If you need to update your time and your date formatting, so maybe you live in a different time zone, you can do that through the Google Sheets file settings, which I've highlighted here in this section. You can change your locale and your time zone to fit your needs and then hit Save Changes. There are also protected cells and sheets enabled within the file because of certain formulas or certain scripts that take place in the background to allow functionality. So in order to preserve those things, there is going to be either cell protection or sheet protection within many, if not all, of the sheets that you see down here. However, you will be able to update certain cells as needed. And throughout the file, you're going to see lots of pop-up notes, which are designated by a black triangle in the top right corner of the cell. And those pop-up notes are going to contain different guidance or instructions or what type of information to put in certain cells. I do recommend referring to those, especially as you're getting started with the file. Moving on to getting started, the important first steps. I definitely recommend that you go through and read all of the instructions because it does contain detailed information about how the file is set up, in addition to the different sheets and how to enter information throughout the file. So that is going to be very useful. The next step is going to access the bill overview sheet and to utilize that sheet to help you understand what are all of the expenses that you have throughout the year so that it can help you plan for what you need to pay for and what you're responsible for, and also how you need to budget throughout the year. So it's not required, but highly recommended. Next, you'll move on to the category sheet. The category sheet really empowers the rest of the file because the information that's entered in categories is going to contain your account names, your fixed expenses, variable expenses, your savings that you're setting aside. So the category sheet, once you input that information, it's going to automatically flow into many of the other sheets contained within the document. And anytime you need to add a category, you're always going to go to the category sheet to do that. Then finally, once your category sheet is set up, then you are going to move to the balances sheet. And this is a sheet where it's going to list the accounts that you want to track. And you will need to input the starting balances for those accounts. Entering the starting balance before you begin entering any other transaction details are going to help allow proper functionality and avoid miscalculations. So this is a key piece that you need to input. One key benefit of this tracker is that it is able to track multiple spending accounts. For example, personally, I have 3 main checking accounts that I have my paycheck deposited into, and then I pay certain bills from those accounts. It's just something that I had established years ago. It works fine. So I continue to use those 3 checking accounts. And so for my needs, I needed one planner that was going to simplify the process of tracking multiple accounts, multiple transactions into one simplified location where I don't have to do it separately in multiple places. It happens all in one place. So that is, for me, a key benefit and also a major difference between my planner and other planners that are out there. Is many of those other planners are set up for one single account. And based on my own personal experience, that doesn't work well for me because I use multiple. Then throughout the rest of the instructions, each section below is going to contain information related to the various sheets within the file. It's going to provide an overview of that particular sheet, and it's also going to contain information about the purpose and the benefits for using those particular features and why it can be helpful. Then you'll also see instructions on how to actually use that sheet and what type of information you should be entering there. As I scroll through, you'll see that there's also, with many of these sheets, you'll see a screenshot to provide examples of what type of information could be listed there that can be useful as you set up your own planner. So that's the same throughout all of these other sheets. And I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom. There is an FAQ that I want to highlight. So this is just going to contain some additional detail to different questions that you may have related to data protection or accessibility of the file across devices and so on. And if you still have questions, you can always reach out and send me an email at intuitivesparklearning@gmail.com. And so if I scroll all the way back up, I also just want to show that each of these sections are hyperlinked. So if you quickly want to go down to FAQ, if you just hover and click on the link, it'll take you directly down to that section. Moving on, just like the important first steps indicated, once you read through your instructions, we're going to the bill overview. With the bill overview, this is where you're going to list all of your bills that you have to pay throughout the year. So this could be mortgage or rent, it could be your car payment, credit card bills, student loans, utilities such as electric or gas bills. So basically anything throughout the entire year that you're responsible for paying, you will want to enter that here. This is going to give you a monthly total and also a yearly total, which will help you as you move along to budgeting to identify how much money you need to set aside in order to ensure that you can pay for these bills. And this is going to be good in terms of planning to make sure that you are able to cover that because you're now budgeting for those items. So within the sheet, we can see that there are different comments on the header columns. So when I hover over the triangle, it's going to provide information about that column, explaining what it is or what you need to enter here. So for the bill name, this is where you're going to put the name of the bill. For the day due, this is going to either contain the day of the month when you have to pay that bill. So if it's a monthly bill like electric, you know you have to pay it maybe on the 26th of every month. So you'll enter that date there. If it's a yearly bill where you pay it once a year, such as maybe you have a security alarm system and you pay that on a yearly basis and that bill is due in July, then you can also just enter the month in this column. So it's either going to be the day or the month, and this will give you an idea of, when everything's due, which is going to help you later. There's also a frequency column here where you're going to indicate how often you pay this bill. So it could be weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly, or yearly, and the amount due. So for the frequency of that bill, what is the amount due that you have to pay normally? And then once you enter that information, these blue columns of monthly and yearly are going to automatically update based on the information from these other columns. One key theme that you're going to see throughout this file is for anything that gets automatically updated based upon the script or calculations, those columns are going to be colored in blue, such as monthly, yearly, and then also our totals. And then any information that you have to manually enter is going to be in the white columns. So I'm just going to enter a couple examples here to give you an idea of what this may look like. And you can name these bills as specifically or generally as you want, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm just using general names. The other thing that I want to call your attention to is when I enter the amount due, you're going to see that the monthly and the yearly column is going to auto update in addition to those totals. Once I enter the amount and click out of it, you'll see that the monthly cost, if I wanted to set that aside on a monthly basis to incrementally save for that, I would have to set aside $83.33. And then we can also see what the yearly cost of this bill is as well. This is a quarterly bill. And then if you have a monthly bill, bi-weekly, weekly, whatever it is, as you enter that information and you select the frequency and the amount due, it's automatically going to update those other fields. If I did another one, maybe for Netflix, maybe that's a monthly bill that I have, and we'll see how that information gets updated once I enter in the white columns. And so now, once I entered that amount, I can see here's my monthly cost, and then additionally, here's my yearly cost. So as you enter all these bills, you're going to see what's that monthly total. So if you are wanting to plan for those bills on a monthly cadence, you have an idea of how much money you need to have per month, and then also what's that total yearly amount. And you can also add any notes as well that may be useful. The bill overview is going to help inform you what your category name should be, and then also as you're setting up your paycheck trackers, how you need to budget for these bills. So moving on to categories. So your categories is where you're going to list your income, your fixed and variable expenses, the money that you're setting aside for savings, and then also the accounts that you're wanting to track your money. So for income, if you have a paycheck, but you also have maybe a side hustle where you're getting some extra money, you can insert that into this section. Your fixed expenses are going to be things like a mortgage, rent, credit cards that are due, student loans, etc. Those things that must be paid regularly. Your variable expenses are going to contain those expenses that change over time. So things like groceries or money to go out and eat at restaurants, the money that you have to buy pet food and things like that. You know, they're not always the same amount time over time, and they are going to vary. So you'll enter all of those in the variable section. Your savings are going to be different savings that you are intentionally setting aside from your paycheck to move into some sort of savings you have, whether that's an account or maybe it's like a sinking fund where you're setting aside money throughout the year to accumulate money towards Christmas so that you can use that sinking fund to pay for your Christmas gifts. Or maybe you have a sinking fund for birthdays where you, again, are setting aside money for the birthday gifts you purchase throughout the year with the intention that you're going to spend that money, versus things like an emergency savings account where you're going to want to set aside money to build up a cushion within your savings so that if an emergency happens, you have money set aside to pay for those things and you don't have to charge it. Your savings information is going to be a combination of your savings accounts in addition to those sinking funds. The transfers that are listed here need to stay as is. The purpose of transfers within this file is to move money between your spending accounts. With my 3 checking accounts, if I move a certain amount of money from one of my checking accounts into another checking account. I just want to ensure that the balance gets updated accordingly, but I don't want it to be counted as income or expenses because I'm just moving money around. And so that's what these transfers are used for. So it's to help ensure that the balances get updated accordingly. So you will not modify these because there is code built into the script that is going to look for this exact wording. And so if that's missing and you're using transfers, it could cause it to not work properly. And then the final column here is for your accounts. So this is where you're going to list the name of your accounts. So it could be checking account 1, 2, and 3, or whatever you want to name that. And then for all of these accounts, that will get auto updated onto the balances sheet. And then the income and the expenses and savings, you'll see that that will update to the expenses sheet in addition to these other sheets for calendar and paycheck trackers. It's important that you only enter information for this table here because the file is only set up to account for this many categories. Also ensure that you don't enter any information within the gray shaded areas. So before I enter a few examples into the category sheet, I just want to show you that within the other sheets, such as balances, right now it's all blank, so we don't see account names listed. If I go to expenses, we have a category drop down and subcategory based upon the category sheet detail. So in categories, we see the main categories. However, the subcategory is not populated yet. So this will get populated after we establish our categories. The other thing that categories will impact is going to be our calendar sheet. And so down at the bottom here, there is a drop down, which is currently empty, but this will get auto updated based upon the income and expenses that are listed in the category sheet. And then finally, in the paycheck tracker, all of our tables here for income source, fixed expenses, variable, and savings, right now it's blank. Then once you enter the categories, this will automatically update based on the categories you've entered for each of these. As I mentioned earlier, categories is really the part of the file that powers everything else. So I just wanted to show you that before I entered any information. So next, I'm going to enter a few examples of each of these categories just to give you an idea of what it's going to look like, what's going to occur. So for my income, I listed paycheck and side hustle. It is important as well that if you have any category names that are similar to one another, that you name them slightly different so that you can see clearly which one it's relating to. And where similar names may occur could be between variable and savings. So for example, I have pets. So part of my regular variable spending is to pay for my pets, whether that is for their food or vet visits. I track those expenses through a pet variable account. Additionally, since I know that I have certain spending for my pets throughout the year, I also set aside some money in a pet savings account or sinking fund. I need to ensure that the name is slightly different between the two. Just going to name my variable expense pets, and then for my savings account, I'll name that pet fund. I'm going to enter a few more examples, and then same thing for my savings account. And then finally, I'm going to enter the accounts that I want to track. So in this example, I entered 2 checking accounts and also cash. So perhaps certain people withdraw cash per paycheck. Maybe they also want to track their cash spending in addition to their checking account spending. So now that I have these categories set up, when I click on balances, which is the next sheet, we're going to see that the account name automatically updated based on the accounts that I had listed in categories. With the balances sheet, this is going to give you a quick real-time snapshot of what your current ending balance is for any of these accounts, in addition to the other information you see here. It is important that before you begin tracking any other detail, that you begin by entering the starting balance for each of these accounts. And as I mentioned before, anything that is colored in blue automatically updates, and then anything in white will need to have information entered there. And if I hover over that column, it's going to provide detail about what needs to be placed in that field. So as I entered my balance, these other columns will begin updating as information is added to expenses. There's also a month-end balance summary, which is going to contain a historical tracking of your ending balance per month. This allows flexibility for people if they are tracking it truly on a month-by-month basis. They can either enter the end date for that period for June, if they are tracking based upon the end of the month, they're going to enter June 30th. Or if people are tracking months based upon their pay period schedules, then it could be a different date. So maybe it could be 6/27. You just need to enter the end date here. There is a script that is going to run, and it's going to refer to this end date. And when it hits this end date, it's going to automatically populate the balance. And so to do that, I just want to call out that there is a helper sheet in this file, which is currently hidden, called settings. So if I click on the all sheets button down at the bottom, you'll see there's a settings sheet down here that is grayed out. You don't need to do anything with this sheet, and it should remain hidden and untouched, because in order for this month-end balance to work, it's going to reference information on settings. But I just want to call out that that is there, and you just need to ignore it. So moving into expenses next. Expenses is where you're going to track everything that occurs. So just like in your checking account, if you check your account online or you receive a statement, there's going to be a line to indicate what has happened throughout time for your account. That could be your paycheck being deposited, and it's also going to be different expenses for that account. So you're going to track similar information in this expense log, and this is going to take the information that's entered based upon the account and the amount, and it's going to provide an updated balance. So the nice thing with this log is that you're able to track all of your transactions across all of your accounts in this one file, and it's automatically going to do that calculation for your current balance as you move on. A few key things that I want to highlight before I enter a couple examples is, again, that blue column, the ending balance is going to update based upon the transaction and the account selected. There's a note about that. You do not need to modify this column at all. And then there's also a subcategory field, which is going to be populated based on the category that you've selected here. And the other thing is the accounts that you had entered in your categories, which is also displayed on balances, is going to be listed in your account dropdown. That's going to be pre-populated for you within the dropdown. You just need to select the correct one that you're working with. The checkbox at the end here is just to indicate that as you're checking this against your account, that transaction has been completed, and you can mark it off as completed. So you know what is pending and what's complete. So I'm just going to enter a few examples here. Perhaps we're starting off in the middle of the month, and June 13th is our first transaction. We'll need to identify what category it fits into. So I'm going to select income. We're going to say maybe this was a pay date. Once I selected income, you'll now see that there is a drop down in the subcategory. And when I click that subcategory, it lists the categories that were listed in the category sheet. So I'm going to select paycheck, and you can enter a description if you'd like, or you can leave it blank, whatever works best for you. And then for the account, you need to indicate which account and how much. So Just using myself as an example again, with my paycheck, I have it split up to go into multiple accounts. If you are in that same situation, then you're going to select, for checking account 1, maybe you have $1,000 going in there. And then once I click out of there, we're going to see the ending balance updates to now it's 2,000. So if I go back to balances and just check that for checking account 1, we started out with $1,000. It updated the deposit of $1,000 that I just entered, and now we have our revised balance of $2,000. Perhaps at the time that I'm doing this was already completed. I got my money in, so I'm going to check off the check mark. So for the next one, I'm going to enter income again. When I select income, there's that drop down again, and so I'm going to select paycheck because I have my paycheck split, and so now I'm going to select checking 2, and I'm going to enter $500 here. And so for checking account 2, now it's updated our current balance to $700, and then we can also see for checking account 1, it's at $2,000. If I wanted to see quickly at a glance again, I can look at my balances and I'll see that same information reflected here. And then just to close out this paycheck, I'm going to indicate income yet again. I'm going to select paycheck, and now I'm going to select cash. Maybe I received a physical check for the balance that I'm going to receive as cash, and so maybe that's another $500. For the cash account, it updated it to 1,000, and again, it's in line with what we have in our balance sheet, and it's all based upon what was entered in the starting balance. So now as I move forward and enter expenses, I'm going to do a few examples of that. So maybe on the 14th, I went grocery shopping and I went to Costco, and for checking account 1, maybe I spent $75, and we can see, again, based on the previous balance for checking 1, it now dropped down to $1,925. I can do the same thing, with the rest of the spending that happened. Maybe I also spent on pets, so that's another variable expense. Maybe I went to PetSmart, got some food, and maybe perhaps I used checking account 2 for that transaction and I spent $22. So once that updates, I can see from the previous balance of $700, now we have this expense that came out and it's at $678. And I will continue to enter every single expense for all of these accounts that I'm tracking throughout the rest of the year. And it's just going to be continuous in this sheet. So I do also want to highlight that anytime you make a change to one of these transactions that occurred previously, it will automatically update your ending balance for all of those things that happen after the fact. So you can make changes at any time and those ending balances will get recalculated. You can also refresh balances at any time by clicking the refresh button, and the first time you click on it, there is going to be a pop-up that is displayed that will ask you to allow access to run the script. You only need to do that the very first time you click the refresh balances button or the protection button. I'm going to show you that in more detail later. But that's just a one-time thing, and then every other time after that, it'll just automatically run the script. It just needs permission the very first time. So moving on to the calendar, this is going to help you to lay out your income and expenses throughout the month. So you do not enter anything in the calendar view other than selecting the month. So if you were wanting to plan ahead for perhaps July, you could change the date by double clicking in the field. The calendar will pop up and you'll select July 1st, and then the dates below are going to update automatically for that month. For the purpose of the example, I'm going to go back to June, and now I have my June dates, and so that's the only thing you'll do up top here. Down at the bottom, there's a table for income and expenses where we have a drop-down list that is going to be populated based upon the categories for income and expenses that you previously entered. You're going to enter that information here for everything that's due in the current month or when you're going to get paid. You're also going to input the due date or the pay date, and then for those bills that are due, you'll enter the amount due so that you know how much you need to plan for. And then similarly, as those items complete, either you get paid or you paid the bill, you're going to check the checkbox to show that it was paid. And the information that's entered down here is going to populate the calendar up here. So just to show a couple of examples, if I select paycheck, and initially you're going to see it down in the blank rows, but once I enter the date, it's going to properly place it into that date field. So if we say we got paid on the 13th and that date has occurred, once I've entered that down here, we can see it correctly added it to the 13th, and I can also select the checkbox and it's going to place a check mark next to that item to visually highlight and show that was completed. I can also do the same thing. Maybe I have credit card number 1 that's going to be due on the 18th. So as I enter that, we'll see it's entered properly in the date field, and maybe that's $100 that's due. Maybe we haven't gotten to that date yet. We're not going to check it off yet. You'll want to ensure that you enter for the month what are your pay dates, what are your income dates, and then also what are the bills that are due for that period. And the calendar is really helpful because it's going to help you track and see the entire month in a view, even if you are tracking per paycheck. As you move ahead, and perhaps you want to set up July's calendar, you can choose whether you are just going to reuse the same calendar sheet and just re-enter the information for the new month, or you may decide that you want to have historical tracking and you want to maintain the information you've previously entered. So if you want to add a new calendar for June, then you can right-click on the sheet and click Duplicate. Once you duplicate it, you'll see that now we are on the copy of calendar. And so you'll want to come up to the month, change it, and again, it's going to reflect that. And then similarly, you're going to come down here and you're going to update your dates as well. The other thing you'll likely want to do is to change the name of the calendar. So it is important that you keep the word calendar in the sheet because there is data protection on this sheet. When I duplicated that sheet, you'll see that the lock is not displayed on the copied sheet. So currently there is no protection. There could be an instance where you accidentally delete a formula and now the calendar is not populating correctly. So in order to ensure sheet protection is added to maintain the integrity, we can use a button to do that. Before I do that, I will rename my sheet to July calendar. And now if I come up to the menu, there's a protection button. And if I click Protect Sheets Now, this is going to run the script, and now there's that pop-up that I had mentioned for the refresh balances or protection. Upon initially clicking that, it's going to request authorization is approved. So you'll have to click OK. It's going to open your Google account. It's going to tell you to select the account. You'll see this message here, like Google hasn't verified. You'll click on the advanced hyperlink. That will open up this section below, and you'll click Go to Budget Template Project. You only need to do this the initial time, and this will not pop up again. So now that I click that, and I'm going to hit Continue, and now we can see that the sheet protection was added to the July calendar. So that is the calendar sheet. And then the other and final section is going to be our paycheck sheet. So moving on to the paycheck sheet, there is a sheet named Initial Month Day Paycheck, and then there's also a Next Month Day Paycheck. So just like with the calendar, you'll need to determine, are you going to reuse the same sheet every time? If so, then you can just use the Initial Month Day Paycheck, and every time you have a new pay period, you're just going to update the sheet for that paycheck. If you want to maintain the historical data throughout the year and you want to track each paycheck separately and also store that information, then you're going to use the next paycheck sheet. And this one will be duplicated over and over and over again as you track each following paycheck. So the difference between the two, it's very minimal. With the initial paycheck sheet, there is a rollover row here. Rollover is basically going to be the money that you had remaining in your accounts at the end of the last period. If you do keep money on hand in your accounts and you roll that over time, then you'll want to indicate what that actual amount is. For the initial paycheck tracker, you will need to enter that in the budget and actual, and following the theme, those are in the white cells that you'll need to enter. But moving forward, the next paychecks or following paychecks that you track, you're going to use this template for the next paycheck, and this will automatically pull in the rollover amount from the previous period. Before you set your paycheck sheet up, you are going to see this ref error. However, once you establish your paycheck sheet and you name it properly according to the guidelines, it's going to pull in the actual amount for you. So that is the only difference between the two sheets, is the next paycheck sheet is going to automatically populate the actual rollover, when the initial, you'll have to enter it manually. For the paycheck tracker, you will need to insert your pay dates. If I look at the calendar, so we'll say we got paid on the 13th, and maybe it's a bi-weekly paycheck. So we're gonna run from the 13th through the 26th. So I'll come here and I'll update that 6/13 to 6/26. And once I did add those dates, you can already see that we have information that is auto-populating based upon the expenses that we entered in our transaction log. So it's going to pull in those items based upon the dates and also depending on what categories were selected. So that will automatically occur. We also need to input what your pay frequency is. So we have several options. For this example, I'm selecting bi-weekly. And then again, this is where we need to indicate what was our rollover actual. So if we go back to our example here, before we started tracking our expenses, this was our starting balance. This was the amount that we had rolled over from our accounts. So this is what we're going to enter into our paycheck tracker. So we're going to enter the $1,700 as our actual amount. And once I've entered that actual, we see that the total balance updates to include the income received as well as the expenses that have occurred for the current pay period, in addition to what the total balance is, including the rollover. So just want to highlight that the pay period balance is only based upon income received during this paycheck period, and the total balance will include the rollover plus the income and expenses throughout the pay period. So your job is going to be to update all of the white columns, which includes the budgeted columns. So we're just, for our initial, we're going to input the same thing, and as I enter information, you can see that our charts are updating as well. For paycheck, we're going to estimate that for this pay period, maybe we were expecting $2,200, but we only got $2,000. We're going to see the difference between those. For side hustle, maybe we're expecting $300 next week. So we can put that in there, but because we haven't received that money yet, the actual hasn't been updated. And then similarly, you're going to go through your fixed expenses and you're going to identify what is your budgeted amount for these items. Are they due in this pay period? Are you setting aside money in this pay period for those? Same thing for your variable expenses and your savings account. The only thing that you need to enter here again is your budgeted amounts. Everything else in blue gets automatically populated. If you were going to track historical data, then it is important that as you move ahead, that you're going to use your next paycheck tracker to do the next pay period. However, it is important that we modify the name of the sheet. So you can choose, do you want to keep these templated sheets intact as they are? If so, you could, duplicate the sheet, and just like with our calendar, we need to rename it. We will want to keep the word paycheck at the end. And just like the title suggests, you're going to enter the month and the day. And this is going to relate to the starting date of the pay period. So I'm going to change this to June 13th paycheck. The other thing you might notice as well is when I duplicated the initial sheet, the lock is not there. So we will want to add sheet protection, but I'm going to do that next because I want to also establish the next file. So again, you can choose to maintain the template as is before you start making changes. Hit duplicate. Now, just like I did with the 6/13 paycheck, I'm going to rename this to be the starting date of the next paycheck, which is going to be June 27th. So once I update my paycheck date to be the starting date of the next pay period, then I need to insert those dates as well. June 27th to 7/10. And once I select biweekly, then we see that our formula properly updated. You can choose to keep these templates intact so that you can continue to duplicate each time, and then have these duplicated sheets to track the actual information. Just like you did with your initial paycheck, you're also going to do the same thing for the next paycheck. The key difference here is that your rollover is automatically going to be updated based upon the ending total balance for the previous pay period. The final thing that you'll want to do is every time you add a new paycheck sheet and every time you add a new calendar sheet, you do want to ensure you add that sheet protection to maintain the formulas so that nothing gets corrupted. So if I click protection, protect sheets now, since I previously enabled and authorized the script to run, I will not see that pop up again. It's just automatically going to apply the sheet protection, and you'll see the lock appear on the sheets. So it ran the script, and we can see now both sheets are protected, and it tells us the script finished. That is the entire system. Just to recap, you can always access your balances to see exactly what your current ending balance is. You'll also come out here to see the month-end balance once those updates occur. The expenses sheet is going to be utilized to track every transaction throughout the entire year, or however you prefer to do it. The calendar is going to be duplicated for each month if you're choosing to maintain the history, or if you prefer to just use the same sheet over and over again, you don't want the historical data, you'll just update that accordingly. And then finally, you're going to update your paycheck trackers each pay period as well. Between the calendar sheet and the paycheck sheet, these are likely going to be the two sheets that you will duplicate time over time. And so once you duplicate those sheets, I highly recommend adding the protection to ensure that it keeps the formulas and the script intact and that there's no issues that occur. And so you can easily apply those by clicking the button. And then finally, if you do need to modify your categories at any time, you can do so. Maybe you have to add categories or rename categories. You can do that by coming to the category sheet, and then the other sheets that contain categories are going to display that updated information. If you modify a category or add a category, you may need to come back to the expenses and update with that category name, especially if it's something that you changed. But you should see moving forward, anything that was added will automatically display there. So that is the Paycheck Budget Planner. I hope that you have as much success with it that I did. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out at any time. Thanks.